About a year ago, I was aimlessly walking through an outdoor flea market, minding my own business, when I found a Royal 10 typewriter from the 1920s. He was dirty and dusty, paper wouldn't roll through it, and he was $45. Some haggling later, I was able to get this Royal 10 home and named him Louie. This machine was heavily covered in oxidized paint, and the metal had a pretty visible layer of grime. As for the paper rolling through, turns out there was a penny stuck inside in the paper tray behind the platen. I didn't even know where to start on Louie, so he sat for a really long time until I got some questions from people on Instagram about how they should restore their typewriters after they saw what I did with Edgar, my Royal H typewriter. When I did that restoration, I didn't have a ton of information about how to properly restore a typewriter so it'll last and work efficiently beyond the initial restoration. When I worked on Edgar, I was using a combination of brake fluid and WD-40 to clean off the layers of grime and cut through rust. While I did properly clean all those chemicals off to avoid a sticky residue, I learned that there are some other ways to remove dirt and grime that are far better for your typewriter in the long run. My dad and I started by using mineral spirits, which we applied to the outside and the inside of the typewriter to help remove dirt and rust and just generally loosen everything up inside the typewriter. Then, using an air compressor, we dried off all the mineral spirits, and this immediately freed up all the keys. It's very important to make sure you're cleaning off all the mineral spirits so they don't eat into the paint. We then used compressed air on the dampening felt on the inside of the typewriter bottom and gave it a real good once-over to remove all the excess dust. The typewriter basically worked when I got it, but aesthetically, he could have used a little help. The paint all over the typewriter was heavily oxidized, so using a polishing compound, I slowly, very slowly, knocked off layers and layers of oxidized paint from the typewriter. I removed the top covers and used polish on those. I had to be really careful around the decals of the typewriter to make sure that I wasn't chipping off any of the paint of those because they're pretty fragile. Here's what a polished one looks like compared to an untouched top cover. I also removed the platen so that I could clean out the top metal and shine that up. Then I went to work on the sides and the back of the typewriter, again, very carefully around the decals. I removed the front plate and the back plates and then took the time to slowly and carefully remove layer after layer using the polishing compound. The basic idea is that you use a damp cloth, apply polish, and then apply light pressure while moving the polish around the surface in circles. After you've knocked off some of the oxidized paint, you take a second clean cloth and buff that polish compound from the typewriter. You do this layers at a time. This process should not be measured in regular time units, but rather seasons of Oak Island, because for about a week, all I did was polish this typewriter and watch treasure hunters dig up that island on Hulu. I had to then make sure I was going around the decals with a Q-tip of polish so that it didn't chip off any part of that paint. You can also see that once I removed the top covers, I had to knock off layers of oxidation around there as well. And once the oxidation was removed and the typewriter was polished, it was time to put it back together. I cleaned the inside windows of the typewriter with some Simple Green because I was out of Windex, and Simple Green is bottled magic. I then put some new felt underneath the keys. The old felt was hardened up, so I took some piano felt, doubled it up, and it was tall enough then to place under the keys of the typewriter. I was so proud of my work that I wanted to commemorate it. I find that I always want to know the machine's stories when I get them, and I know that this machine has had some restoration done at one point because there's no way that dampening felt is from 1920, and there's also a really peculiar shine around the shift keys that makes me think someone else was there before me. So I typed up a tag and hot glued it on the inside of the back of the typewriter. Even though it still needs a protective wax applied to keep the shine nice and the fingerprints off, this machine is good to go. And here is King Louie in all his shiny glory. Lessons I learned. Ventilation is a thing. I was undertaking this process in my room, which has a singular window. And by day 2, I had propped the window up and was using a fan and burning multiple candles to keep the smell of car polish from infiltrating the rest of the house. Patience is huge. Anytime I got frustrated with my lack of progress on knocking off that oxidation, I would go a little bit further and it would shine right up. Which makes the process also incredibly rewarding because you can actually see and measure your progress. Restoration, revamping, or cleaning a typewriter all has to be done really carefully in order to make sure that you're taking care of the typewriter in the long run and not just the immediate. Typewriters are so much older than most of us, and they're still around, and with some extra care, they can last even longer. I want to thank you all for sticking around through this lengthy, intensive, and somewhat intoxicating process. If you're interested in more typewriter content, be sure to check out the videos on this channel. We also have an Instagram at just.my.typewriter. Thanks so much for watching, and I want to remind you that you're just my type writer.